It was not yet mid-afternoon by the time the members of the little company under Qui Gon Jinn's command reached Mos Espa and made their way toward the spaceport center. Mos Espa was large and sprawling and had the look of a gnarled serpent hunkered down in the sand to escape the heat. The buildings were domed and thick-walled and curved to protect against the sun, and the stalls and shops were fronted by awnings and verandas that provided a measure of shade to their vendors. Streets were broad and packed with beings of every shape and size, most from off-planet. Some rode the desert-seasoned Eopes, domesticated banthas, massive and horned and lumbering dewbacks, hauled carts, sleds, and wagons that ran on wheels and mechanical tracks by turn, a mishmash of commerce tracking between Tatooine's smaller ports and the planets of star systems beyond. Qui-Gon kept a close watch for trouble. There were Rodians and Dugs and others whose purpose was always suspect. Most of those they passed paid them no notice. One or two turned to glance at Jar Jar, but dismissed the Gungan almost out of hand once they got a good look at him. As a group, they blended in nicely. There were so many combinations of creatures of every species that the appearance of one more meant almost nothing. Tatooine is home to Jabba the Hutt, who controls the bulk of the trafficking in illegal goods, piracy, and slavery that generates most of the planet's wealth, Qui-Gon was explaining to Padme. He had been on Tatooine before, though it had been some years ago. Jabba controls the spaceports and settlements, all of the populated areas. The desert belongs to the Jawas, who scavenge whatever they can find to settle trade, and to the Tuskens, who live a nomadic life and feel free to steal from everyone. The Jedi kept his voice low and conversational. The girl walked silently at his elbow, her sharp eyes taking in everything. Speeders nosed by them, and droids of every size toiled in the service of desert-garbed aliens. There are a number of farms as well, outlying operations that take advantage of the climate. Moisture farms, for the most part, operated by off-worlders, not a part of the indigenous tribes and scavengers, not connected directly to the Hutts. His eyes swept the street ahead. This is a rough and dangerous place. Most avoid it. Its few spaceports have become havens for those who do not wish to be found. Padme glanced up at him. Like us, she said. A pair of domesticated banthas rumbled down the broad avenue, hairy bulks clearing a path for a sled train of quarry blocks and metal struts, horned heads nodding sleepily, padded feet stirring sand and dust in thick clouds with each lumbering step. Their driver dozed atop the foremost sled in the train, small and insignificant in their shadow. Jar Jar Binks stayed as close as he could manage to the Jedi and the girl, his eyes darting left and right, head swiveling as if it might twist right off his shoulders. Nothing he saw was familiar or welcome. Hard looks followed after him. Sharp eyes measured him for things he would just as soon not think about. Stares were at best challenging and at worst unfriendly. He did not like this place. He wished he were almost anywhere else. "Tisn't very, very bad, tisn't." He swallowed against a dryness in his throat that was caused by more than the heat. "Nothing good about this place." He took a careless step and found himself ankle deep in a foul-smelling ooze. Oh, tisn't icky go." R2-D2 rolled cheerfully along at his side, beeping and chirping in a futile effort at reassuring the Gungan that all was well. They traveled the main street of the spaceport to its far end and turned down a side street that led to a small plaza ringed with salvage dealers and junk shops. Qui-Gon glanced at the mounds of engine parts, control panels, and communication chips recovered from starships and speeders. "We'll try one of the smaller dealers first," he advised, nodding toward one in which a vast pile of old transports and parts was heaped within an attached compound. They walked through the shop's low entry and were greeted by a pudgy blue creature who flew into their faces like a crazed probe, tiny wings buzzing so fast they could barely be seen. "Achubadanago!" it snapped in a frizzy, guttural voice, demanding to know their business. A Toydarian, Qui-Gon thought. He knew enough to recognize one, but not much else. "I need parts for a J-Type 327 Nubian," he advised the other. The Toydarian fairly beamed with delight. his reticular snout curling over his toothy mouth and making odd smacking noises. "Ah, yes! Nobin! We have lots of that!" The sharp, bulbous eyes flicked from one face to the other, ending with a Gungan. "What's this?" Jar Jar shrank behind Qui Gon fearfully. "Never mind that." The Jedi brushed the Toydarian's question aside. "Can you help us or not?" "Can you pay me or not? That's the question." The skinny blue arms crossed defiantly over the rounded torso as the Toydarian regarded them with disdain. "What kind of junk you after, farmer?" "My droid has a readout of what I need," Qui-Gon advised the other with a glance down at the R2 unit. Still hanging midair in front of Qui-Gon's nose, the Toydarian glanced over one shoulder. "Pirage, nobody uncle!" A small, disheveled boy raced in from the salvage yard, coming to an uncertain stop in front of them. His clothes were ragged and thick with grime, and he had the look of someone about to be given a beating. He flinched as the Toydarian wheeled back and lifted a hand in admonishment. "What took you so long?" "Me Tasachopaski," the boy responded quickly, blue eyes taking in the newcomers with a quick glance. "I was cleaning out the bin like you—" "Chut! The Toydarian threw up his hands angrily. "Never mind the bin, watch the store, I've got selling to do." He flitted back around to face his customers. "So, let me take you out back, huh? You'll soon find what you need." He darted toward the salvage yard, beckoning Qui-Gon eagerly. The Jedi followed, with R2-D2 trundling after. Jar Jar moved to a shelf and picked up an odd-looking bit of metal, intrigued by its shape, wondering what it was. "Don't touch anything," Qui-Gon called over his shoulder, his tone of voice sharp. Jar Jar put the item down and made a face at Qui-Gon's departing back, sticking out his long tongue in defiance. When the Jedi was out of sight, he picked up the part again. Anakin Skywalker could not take his eyes off the girl. He noticed her the moment he entered Watto's shop, even before Watto said anything, and he hadn't been able to stop looking at her since. He barely heard what Watto said to him about watching the shop. He barely noticed the strange-looking creature that had come in with her and was poking around in the shelves and bins. Even after she noticed he was staring at her, he could not help himself. He moved now to an open space on the counter, hoisted himself up, and sat watching her while pretending to clean a transmitter cell. She was looking back at him now, embarrassment turning to curiosity. She was small and slender with long braided brown hair, brown eyes, and a face he found so beautiful that he had nothing to which he could compare it. She was dressed in rough peasant's clothing, but she seemed very self-possessed. She gave him an amused smile, and he felt himself melting in confusion and wonder. He took a deep breath. "Are you an angel?" he asked quietly. The girl stared. "What?" "An angel." Anakin straightened a bit. "They live on the moons of Iago, I think. They are the most beautiful creatures in the universe. They are good and kind, and so pretty they make even the most hardened space pirates cry like small children." She gave him a confused look. "I've never heard of angels," she said. "You must be one of them," Anakin insisted. "Maybe you just don't know it." "You're a funny little boy." The amused smile returned. "How do you know so much?" Anakin smiled back and shrugged. "I listen to all the traders and pilots who come through here." He glanced toward the salvage yard. "I'm a pilot, you know. Someday, I'm going to fly away from this place." The girl wandered to one end of the counter, looked away, then back again. "Have you been here long?" "Since I was very little. 3, I think. My mom and I were sold to Gardola the Hutt, but she lost us to Watto, betting on the pod races. Watto's a lot better master, I think." She stared at him in shock. "You're a slave?" The way she said it made Anakin feel ashamed and angry. He glared at her defiantly. "I'm a person." "I'm sorry," she said quickly, looking upset and embarrassed. "I don't fully understand, I guess. This is a strange world to me." He studied her intently for a moment, thinking of other things, wanting to tell her of them. "You are a strange girl to me," he said instead. He swung his legs out from the counter. My name is Anakin Skywalker. She brushed at her hair. Padme Neberi. The strange creature she had come in with wandered back to the front of the shop and bent over a stout little droid body with a bulbous nose. Reaching up curiously, it pushed at the nose with one finger. Instantly, armatures popped out from every direction, metal limbs swinging into place. The droid's motors whizzed and whirred, and it jerked to life and began moving forward. Padme's odd companion went after it with a moan of dismay, grabbing on in an effort to slow it down, but the droid continued marching through the shop, knocking over everything it came in contact with. "Hit the nose!" Anakin called out, unable to keep himself from laughing. The creature did as it was told, pounding the droid's nose wildly. The droid stopped at once. The arms and legs retracted, the motor shut down, and the droid went still. Both Anakin and Padme were laughing now, and their laughter increased as they saw the look on the unfortunate creature's long-built face. Anakin looked at Padme, and the girl at him. Their laughter died away. The girl reached up to touch her hair self-consciously, but she did not divert her gaze. "I'm going to marry you," the boy said suddenly. There was a moment of silence, and she began laughing again, a sweet, musical sound he didn't mind at all. The creature who accompanied her rolled his eyes. "I mean it," he insisted. "You are an odd one," she said, her laughter dying away. "Why do you say that?" He hesitated. "I guess because it's what I believe." Her smile was dazzling. "Well, I'm afraid I can't marry you." She paused, searching her memory for his name. "Anakin," he said. "Anakin." She cocked her head. "You're just a little boy." His gaze was intense as he faced her. "I won't always be," he said quietly. In the salvage yard, Watto was studying the screen of a portable memory bank he held in one hand, tracing through his inventory record. Qui Gon, arms folded into his farmer's poncho, stood waiting patiently, the R2 unit at his side.
"Ah, here it is! A T-14 hyperdrive generator!"
The Toydarian's wings beat wildly as he hovered before the Jedi, his gnarled finger jabbing at the view screen.
"You're in luck! I'm the only one hereabouts who has one. But you might as well buy a new ship. It would be cheaper, I think, Speaking of which, how's you gonna pay for all this, farmer?"
Qui-Gon considered. "I have 20,000 Republic dataries to put toward."
"Republic credits?"
Watto exploded in disgust.
"Republic credits are no good out here. I need something better than that. Something of value."
The Jedi Master shook his head. "I don't have anything else." One hand came up, passing casually in front of the Toydarian's face. "But credits will do fine."
"No, they won't!"
Watto snapped, buzzing angrily. Qui-Gon frowned, then passed his hand in front of the pudgy blue alien again, bringing the full force of his Jedi suggestive power to bear. "Credits will do fine," he repeated. Watto sneered.
"No, they won't!" he repeated. "What do you think you're doing, waving your hand around like that? You think you're some kind of Jedi? Ha! I'm a Toydarian! My tricks don't work on me, only money. No parts, no deal. And no one else has a T-14 hyperdrive generator, I can promise you that!"
Chagrined, Qui-Gon wheeled back for the shop, the R2 unit following at his heels. The Toydarian shouted after them to come back when they had something worthwhile to trade, still scolding the Jedi Master for trying to foist Republic credits on him. Qui-Gon re-entered the shop just as Jar Jar pulled apart from a large stack and sent the entire arrangement tumbling to the floor. His efforts at correcting the problem brought a second display crashing down as well. The boy and the Queen's handmaiden were deep in discussion, paying no attention to the Gungan. "We're leaving," Qui-Gon announced to the girl, moving toward the shop's entry, the R2 unit trundling along behind. Jar Jar was quick to follow, anxious to escape his latest mess. Padme gave the boy a warm smile. "I'm glad I met you, Anakin," she said, turning after them. "I'm glad I met you too," he called after, a reluctance evident in his voice. Watto flew in from the salvage yard, shaking his head in disgust.
Outlanders. They think because we live so far from everything, we know nothing.
Anakin was still staring longingly after Padme, his gaze fixed on the empty doorway. They seemed nice enough to me. Watto snorted and flew into his face.
Clean up this mess, then you can go home.
Anakin brightened, gave a small cheer, and went quickly to work. Qui Gon led his companions back through the little plaza of salvage shops toward the main avenue, at a place where two buildings divided to form a shadowed niche. The Jedi Master moved everyone from view and brought out his comlink from beneath his poncho. Padme and the R2 unit stood waiting patiently, but Jar Jar prowled the space as if trapped, eyes fixed nervously on the busy street. When Obi-Wan responded to the comlink's pulse, Qui-Gon quickly filled him in on the situation. "Are you sure there isn't anything of value left aboard?" he concluded. There was a pause at the other end. "A few containers of supplies, the Queen's wardrobe, some jewelry maybe. Not enough for you to barter with. Not in the amounts you're talking about." "All right," Qui-Gon responded with a frown. "Another solution will present itself. I'll check back." He tucked the comlink beneath his poncho and signaled to the others. He was moving toward the street again when Jar Jar grabbed his arm. "No then, sire," the Gungan pleaded. "The beings hereabouts crazy nothing. We shall be wild and crunched." "Not likely," Qui-Gon replied with a sigh, freeing himself. "We have nothing of value. That's our problem." They started back down the street, Qui-Gon trying to think what to do next. Padme and R2-D2 stayed close as they made their way through the crowds, but Jar Jar began to lag behind, distracted by all the strange sights and smells. They were passing an outdoor cafe, its tables occupied by a rough-looking bunch of aliens, among them a Dug who was holding forth on the merits of pod racing. Jar Jar hurried to catch up to his companions, but then caught sight of a string of frogs hanging from a wire in front of a nearby stall. The Gungan slowed, his mouth watering. He had not eaten in some time. He glanced around to see if anyone was looking, then unfurled his long tongue and snapped up one of the frogs. The frog disappeared into Jar Jar's mouth in the blink of an eye. Unfortunately, the frog was still securely tied to the wire. Jar Jar stood there, the wire hanging out of his mouth, unable to move. The vendor in charge of the stall rushed out. "Hey, that will be 7 truggets!" Jar Jar glanced frantically down the street for his companions, but they were already out of sight. In desperation, he let go of the frog. The frog popped out of his mouth, as if catapulted, winging away at the end of the taut wire. It ricocheted this way and that, breaking free at last, to land directly in the Dug's soup, splashing gooey liquid all over him. The gangly Dug leapt to his feet in fury, catching sight of the hapless Jar Jar as he tried to move away from the frog vendor. Springing across the table on all fours, he was on top of the Gungan in an instant, grabbing him by the throat. "Chuba! You!" the Dug snarled through its corded snout. Feelers and mandibles writhed. "Is this yours?" The Dug shoved the frog in the Gungan's face threateningly. Jar Jar could not get any words out, gasping for breath, fighting to break free. His eyes rolled wildly as he looked for help that wasn't there. Other creatures pushed forward to surround him, Rhodians among them. The Dug threw Jar Jar to the ground, shouting at him, hovering over him in a crouch. Desperately, the Gungan tried to scramble to safety. "No, no," he moaned plaintively as he sought an avenue of escape. "Why Nisa always the one?" "Because you're afraid," a voice answered calmly. Anakin Skywalker pushed his way through the crowd, coming up to stand next to the Dug. The boy seemed unafraid of the creature, undeterred by the hard-eyed crowd, his bearing self-assured. He gave the Dug an appraising look. "Chesko Sebulba," he said. "Careful, this one's very well connected." Sebulba turned to face the boy, cruel face twisting with disdain as he caught sight of the newcomer. "Tuni Rana Dunko Shag," he snapped, demanding to know what the boy meant. Anakin shrugged. "Connected, as in hut." The blue eyes fixed the Dug and saw a hint of fear in the other's face. "Big time connected this one, Sebulba. I'd hate to see you dice before we had a chance to race again." The duck spit in fury.
Lick me, Chawa. Next time we race Wormo, it will be the end of you.
He gestured violently.
Uto Nuto Wushag. If you weren't a slave, I'd squash you here and now.
With a final glare at the cringing Jar Jar, Sebulba wheeled away, taking his companions with him, back to their tables and their food and drink. Anakin stared after the dog. Yeah, it'd be a pity if you had to pay for me, he said softly. He was helping Jar Jar back to his feet when Qui Gon, Padme, and R2-D2, having finally missed the Gungan, reappeared hurriedly through the crowd. Hi, he greeted cheerfully, happy to see Padme again so soon. Your buddy here was about to be turned into orange goo. He picked a fight with a Dug, an especially dangerous Dug. No sir, the chagrined Gungan insisted, brushing off dust and sand.
Miss I hatin' crunching. That's the last thing Miss I want.
Qui-Gon gave Jar Jar a careful once-over, glanced around at the crowd, and took the Gungan by the arm. Nevertheless, the boy saved you from a beating. You have a penchant for finding trouble, Jar Jar. He gave Anakin a short nod. Thank you, my young friend. Padme gave Anakin a warm smile as well, and the boy felt himself blush with pride.
But Misa doing nothing,
Jar Jar insisted, still trying to defend himself, hands gesturing for emphasis. You were afraid, the boy told him, looking up at the long-billed face solemnly. Fear attracts the fearful. Sebulba was trying to overcome his fear by squashing you. He cocked his head at the Gungan. You can help yourself by being less afraid. And that works for you? Padme asked skeptically, giving him a wry look. Anakin smiled and shrugged. Well, up to a point. Anxious to spend as much time as possible with the girl, he persuaded the group to follow him a short distance down the street to a fruit stand, a ramshackle affair formed by a makeshift ragged awning stretched over a framework of bent poles. Boxes of brightly colored fruit were arranged on a rack tilted toward the street for viewing. A weathered old lady, gray-haired and stooped, her simple clothing patched and worn, rose from a stool to greet them on their approach. How are you feeling today, Jira? Anakin asked her, giving her a quick hug. The old lady smiled. The heat's never been kind to me, you know, Annie. Guess what? The boy replied quickly, beaming. I found that cooling unit I've been searching for. It's pretty beat up, but I'll have it fixed up for you in no time. I promise. That should help. Jira reached out to brush his pink cheek with her wrinkled hand, her smile broadening. You're a fine boy, Annie. Anakin shrugged off the compliment and began scanning the fruit display. I'll take 4 pallies, Jira. He glanced at Padme eagerly. You'll like these. He reached into his pocket for the truggets he had been saving, but when he brought them out to pay Jira, he dropped one. The farmer, standing next to him, bent to retrieve it. As he did, his poncho opened just far enough that the boy caught sight of the lightsaber hanging from the belt about his waist. The boy's eyes went wide, but he masked his surprise by focusing on the coins. He only had 3, he found. Whoops, I thought I had more, he said quickly, not looking up. Make that 3 pallies, Jira. I'm not that hungry anyway. The old woman gave Qui-Gon, Padme, and Jar Jar their pallies, and took the coins from Anakin. A gust of wind whipped down the street, rattling the framework of poles and causing the awning to billow. A second gust sent dust swirling in all directions. Jira rubbed her arms with her gnarled hands. Gracious, my bones are aching. There's a storm coming, Annie. You'd better get home quick. The wind gusted in a series of sharp blasts that sent sand and loose debris flying. Anakin glanced at the sky, then at Qui-Gon. Do you have shelter? He asked. The Jedi Master nodded. We'll head back to our ship. Thank you again, my young friend, for... Is your ship far? The boy interrupted hurriedly. All around them, shopkeepers and vendors were closing and shutting windows and doors, carrying goods and wares inside, wrapping coverings over displays and boxes. It's on the city's outskirts, Padme answered, turning away from the stinging gusts of sand. Anakin took her hand quickly, tugging on it. You'll never reach the outskirts in time. Sandstorms are very, very dangerous. Come with me. You can wait it out at my home. It's not far. My mom won't mind. Hurry! With the wind howling all about them and the air clouded with sand, Anakin Skywalker shouted goodbye to Jira and led his newly adopted charges down the street in a rush. On the outskirts of Mos Espa, ObiWan Kenobi stood near the nose of the Nubian as the wind gathered force, whipping at his robe, tearing across the broad expanse of the Tatooine desert. His troubled eyes looked off into the distance where Mos Espa was beginning to disappear behind a curtain of sand. He turned as Captain Panaka came down the ramp of the transport to join him. "This storm's going to slow them down?" the Jedi observed worriedly. Panaka nodded. "It looks pretty bad. We'd better seal up the ship before it gets any worse." There was a beep from the soldier's comlink. Panaka retrieved the communicator from his belt. "Yes?" Rick Olier's voice rose from the speaker. "We're receiving a message from home." Panaka and Obi-Wan exchanged glances. "We'll be right there," the captain advised. They went up the ramp quickly, sealing it behind them. The transmission had been received in the Queen's chambers. At Rick Olier's direction, they found Amidala and her handmaidens, Irte and Rebe, revealing a hologram of Sio Bibble that was shimmering weakly at one end of the room, the governor's voice breaking up in transmission. "Cut off all our food supplies until you return. Death toll rising. Catastrophic. Must bow to their wishes, Your Highness." Sio Bibble's image and voice faded and returned, garbled still. "Please, I beg of you, tell us what to do. If you can hear me, Your Highness, you must contact me." The transmission flickered and disappeared. The governor's voice faded into silence. Queen Amidala sat staring at the empty space it left behind, her smooth face troubled. Her hands worked quietly in her lap, betraying a nervousness she could not quite manage to hide. Her gaze shifted to Obi-Wan. The Jedi shook his head quickly. "It is a trick. Send no reply, Your Highness. Send no transmission of any kind." The Queen stared at him uncertainly for a moment, then nodded in acquiescence. Obi-Wan left her chambers without further comment, hoping fervently he had made the right decision.